Hello everybody, today I will read an article about the migration crisis. Okay, here we go. So, migrations according to Adolf Fick. The recent affair of the Aquarius ship and the decision to deny its landing in an Italian port only marks one of the many episodes that cause a stir and divide the public opinion on the issue of immigration from the North African coasts. In Italy, there are two main factions, those who are in favor and those against the reception. The former accuse the latter of being racist. The latter say that the former are bleeding hard and out of reality. Beyond the biased news and the anti-immigrant propaganda about hotels, phantasmagorical daily stipends, etc., the front of people against has increased in recent years for a simple fact. From 2014 to the end of 2017, over 620,000 arrivals by sea have been recorded. And since the flow shows no sign of diminishing, many people have raised the concern that this phenomenon could put in crisis the very endurance of the reception system of integration, and not only. It is naive, at least, to believe that the question is due only to qualitative terms, namely a sudden increase in intolerance and racism. The quantitative data should have more space in debates around current issues. And in the case of immigration, it is not indifferent that there are 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 or 1 million migrants to enter the Italian border every year. To add further perplexities, there are data on the unequal distribution of age. Almost all are young. On the unbalanced distribution of sexes, approximately 90% is male, and the low level of education in addition to the ignorance of Italian language, which make difficult to get a job in a context that increasingly requires specialized skills. And all this ends up favoring both the exploitation for degrading works and, in some cases, the expansions of the labor pool for organized crime. Yes, it is true that the crimes in Italy are in absolute decline, but it is still significant that 35% of the prison population is of foreign origin, compared to the presence in the territory of 8%. Only for this consideration I could be accused of racism, but I am not, without but. Racism is a theory that is not only dangerous and detrimental to human dignity, but also a theory without any scientific basis. End of the story. We must not be afraid of reality and of factual truth. One should not be afraid to confront it in order to try to understand what's going on. Instead, I find rather worrying the attitude of those who deny the facts just to avoid to question their positions of principle. And here I reported facts, numbers, and then I will report an analysis of the migratory phenomenon and an operative proposal to work on a solution to the problem. I say problem on purpose and not other more politically correct terms, because migrations arise from a deep discomfort, of which the landings are nothing but one of the terminal points. Although many dispute the distinction between refugees on one hand and economic migrants on the other, as far as I'm concerned, I find it useful because we identify two categories of people who move for two different types of motivation. It follows that the solution to be found are of different nature. In this talk, I will focus only on so-called economic migrants, who constitute the overwhelming majority of arrivals. Just to give a number, of the 130,000 asylum seekers in Italy in 2017, less than 10,000 came from Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq and Eritrea, in which it is enforced one of the most oppressive dictatorships in the world. For the sake of clarity, we mean for economic migrants those who move from one country to another with the hope of finding better job opportunities and improving their economic condition. Now, let's try to provide a model to better interpret the migratory phenomenon towards Italy. What I will say is inspired by the words of the electronic engineer Zeno Gaburro, professor of experimental physics at the University of Trento and Harvard. I had the great pleasure to listen to him on September the 14th, 2017, at the meeting of Fisicità, an event of scientific dissemination held under the patronage of the city of Trento. Mr. Gaburro spoke about his voluntary work as a professor at higher education institutions in Africa, in particular, if I remember correctly, in Mauritius. His commitment consists, and perhaps still consists, in teaching skills that could be useful for his young students to open a successful business. Zeno Gaburro explained that without solid and widespread economic development in Africa, there is no reason to believe that migratory flows to Europe will ever be exhausted. He also explained that to encourage migration, there is a huge difference in the index of human development between Central and Northern Africa and Europe. He had shown, by way of example, a map like this one below that I will show you. As you can see, we move from low levels of human development in Central Africa countries to very high European levels in the space of just over 4,000 kilometers, and this change in the value of the index can pass under the technical term of gradient, which, in the study of transport of matter, the higher it is, the more it contributes to increase the flow of matter. This is Fick's first law. Adolf Fick was a German mathematician and physicist with a passion for medicine. It has gone down in history from formulating laws that describe the spread of gas through liquid membranes. How does the formula work in a nutshell, and how can it be useful to interpret the migration phenomenon in question? Below you see the simplified formula, at least as I understood it thanks to a video by Khan Academy. J, or flux, is the quantity of matter that crosses a space per unit of time, the V pointed, divided by the arrival surface, A. In this way we obtain a flux, that is, the quantity of matter passing by unit of time per unit of arrival space. The gradient is instead the difference of pressures, P1 and P2, of the moving material divided by the distance to be traveled, D. Instead of the pressures, we could find a difference in concentrations of matter. It would not change the meaning. As the pressure difference increases, the gradient also increases. The distance d instead, which is the measure of the path, works in reverse. The greater the distance, the lower the gradient. Finally, there is the d, that is the coefficient of diffusion or diffusivity, which, in the case of the transport of matter, depends on the characteristics of the space in which the molecules move, but also on the characteristics of the moving material. As one can easily guess, there are characteristics that favor the diffusion, others that disadvantage it. The diffusivity includes them all, so to speak. Now, how we do adapt this formula to the migratory phenomenon towards the northern coast of the Mediterranean. In the place of the flow of matter, we replace the flow of people. As to the difference in pressure, we can instead replace it, forcing the terms a little bit, with the great difference in the index of human development, that is, the set of conditions that make life more or less comfortable in social, economic, and health terms. The distance remains the distance, which is trivially the path that must be traveled to get to the goal. It goes without saying that the longer the path is, the less likely it is that a person starts traveling. In Europe, very few Angolans and Mozambicans arrive. And what about diffusivity? Many factors come into play here, some encouraging the journey, others rather discouraging it. Let's do a fantasy exercise and try to imagine the factors that contribute positively or negatively to this coefficient. The danger of traveling, the cost of the trip, information on the trip, information on what happens once you reach the destination, the presence of traffickers and smugglers, the presence of controls along the borders, the presence of humanitarian services, relatives or acquaintances who have already made the trip, political instability of countries along the route, possession of computer system useful for traveling, smartphone, etc., bravery, confidence in one's own strength, etc. Now, to those who follow the management of migrants, it seems pretty clear that governments, European governments in general, and the Italian governments in particular, focus only on the factors that make up the diffusivity as we have now understood it. To discourage the journey of migrants, the various Berlusconi, Bossi, Fini, Maroni, Renzi, Gentiloni, Minniti and Salvini have tried to increase the discouraging factors, for example by agreeing with Gaddafi for the construction of concentration camps in Libya, sending the army to patrol the route of migrants in Niger, agreeing after Gaddafi with the Libyan communities for the blocking of migrants, or by limiting the margins of action of NGOs operating in the Mediterranean. If we exclude those politicians who scream the void slogan, "Let's help them home," nobody asks if it is not more right and profitable to focus on the gradient of the migratory flow, namely the difference of human development. The geographical distance cannot be changed. Too difficult? Is that too expensive? Too long? Too human? As far as I'm concerned, it is the only way to go. And it's not even sure that it cannot produce positive results in the medium term. And here we are at the operational proposal summarized in the motto, "Trust to the little ones." If before I stole from Frick for the analysis of the migratory flow, this time I steal from a Nobel Peace Prize, Muhammad Yunus, the idea for the operational proposal. Yunus has been a great advocate of microcredit, that is, the practice of granting small loans to people with low incomes who cannot access traditional credit because they lack guarantees to offer to banks. Although the microfinance and microcredit system has been criticized and the number of detractors is growing more and more, other evidences show that to give confidence to small economical actors works. Not only is the success rate of companies born thanks to microloans in many cases satisfactory, but also the percentage of repayment of loans is quite high, where interest rates are not high. The philosophy behind microcredit is purely liberal. There is no more suitable person to work on a project and to make sure that it will succeed than the person who has a personal interest in it. Microcredit is a theory of development that believes in the strength of the real economy of small needs and small entrepreneurs, rather than in the economical drive of large companies with high profits and that perhaps take on little staff. Those who support microcredit believe that the production of wealth is the prerequisite for further progress also in other areas of common life. And this is an historical incontrovertible fact. Economical prosperity is a necessary condition for progress, and therefore for the improvement of living conditions. I know well that some romantic will have turned the nose in front of this assertion, but there are inescapable evidences. The advocates of microcredit also believe that the paternalistic and vaguely colonial aid to the third world of large humanitarian organizations, which very often limit themselves to subsistence and not to providing people with tools to make the people become autonomous economically, is worth little, while it is more useful to give real trust and opportunity to small local economic operators. Let's do an hypothesis. A state credit institution that contributes 2 billion euros every year for countries with a high rate of emigration, and which gives very convenient loans and without many bureaucratic steps to those who have a small business or entrepreneurial project, loans from 1,000 to 3,000 euros, such an institution can virtually help 1 million people start or continue an economical activity each year. And if 1,000, 2,000 or 3,000 euros do not seem sufficient to buy a tool, rent a room, buy a used car, remember that in Gambia the average per capita annual income is 1,500 euros, in Nigeria 5,100 euros, in Senegal 2,300 euros, in Tunisia 10,000 euros, while in Italy it is 32,000 euros. It would be a generous, courageous and effective plan, because it would come directly to those really interested in the development process without any intermediaries. It would be a more useful plan than the neocolonist one of China, which mostly rely on the penetration of Chinese companies in an underdeveloped world with the pretext of building infrastructures. A similar INVEST program, perhaps in concert with other European countries, would soon be able to increase the Human Development Index of the countries from which most of the economical migrants come, and to loosen the pressure difference mentioned above regarding Fick's law. Such a plan would be able to contribute to creating a less unequal and more just world. I conclude by saying that in the ideal world, every person is free to go and live where he wishes, on the sole basis of personal preferences, with which nothing must have to do with the constriction of poverty, misery or insecurity. The ideal world does not exist, of course, but attempts to approach it are an obligation for all of us. Okay, thank you very much, and see you next time. I hope you enjoyed.